The organization you are the executive director of is the Planning Commission. What's the official name for it?
The Hillsborough County City-County Planning Commission.
City-County. Melissa Zornitta, welcome to the show.
Thank you.
And so, City-County, why is it called City-County? Why is it not just the county, which encompasses all the different municipalities? Is there a history there?
Well, it was established by state law in 1959, and I have to assume that they wanted to be inclusive and make sure it was clear that it was representing the three cities.
Yeah.
And so we do the planning for Tampa, Temple Terrace, Plant City, and the unincorporated area.
Got it. Got it. And you said 1959, this was actually state law.
Yep.
And the state law said what? Each county has to create its own planning committee?
No, this is a state law that's specific to Hillsborough County that requires that there be the Hillsborough County City-County Planning Commission specific just for our area. And it calls for there to be a long-range planning organization that's consolidated for all four local governments here. And essentially, we do the long-range comprehensive planning that is now state mandated for all local governments. All local governments in Florida are required to have a local planning agency. It's just here we're required to be consolidated for all four local governments.
So all across Florida, even cities, right? Like the city of Tampa is required to have its
Yes.
own,
Yeah.
along with this one that's together, correct or no?
No, every local government is required to have one. In Hillsborough County, it's required that there's only one, and it's the Planning Commission.
Got it. Interesting.
Yeah.
You ever think, and maybe you know, before 1959, I mean, what was planning like? You look at these old maps of Tampa or any other city, and you see these old photos, and it looks like things went relatively well. You do hear horror stories about fires that devastate an entire city, or some of these tragedies where buildings collapse, but that still happens today. What was going on in planning before that was established in the late 50s?
Well, apparently, some of the reason why the folks in the state legislature wanted to create the Planning Commission was because there was a good bit of corruption going on as it related to zoning and land use. And so they felt like there needed to be an independent and more objective voice in that process. And that's what was the impetus for the Planning Commission. We're a recommending body. We don't make the final decision on these land use matters. We provide a recommendation to Tampa City Council or the Board of County Commissioners, but they felt, and it was largely, I understand, the impetus of Sam Gibbons, that he thought there needs to be a non-political voice in these matters because there was a lot of corruption going on.
And how's the organization set up? Are you appointed by government officials?
So there are 10 planning commissioners who are volunteers, 4 who are appointed by Tampa City Council, 4 who are appointed by the Board of County Commissioners, 1 who's appointed by the City of Plant City, and 1 by the City of Temple Terrace. And then we do have 2 ex officio members who are non-voting, 1 from MacDill Air Force Base and 1 from the school board. Those are required by state law because those are important aspects of our community that we should be coordinating with as we're doing our long-range planning. And then I am hired by those planning commissioners to be the executive director, and then we have a staff.
And your role as executive director, is there a certain amount of, term that comes with your appointment, like 4 years, 1 year?
Yeah, I have a contract that right now goes to 2028, and then we talk about if it
Then
gets
who knows?
renewed. Yeah, things like that. Yeah.
Very cool. And how
Yeah.
long have you been executive director for?
I've been executive director for 10 years.
For 10 years.
hmm
Lots happened in 10
A
years.
lot has happened in 10 years. Yeah.
Amazing. So, what about like police and fire? That's all within those districts, right? Like the city of Tampa, those appointees are sort of advocating on the behalf of maybe the Tampa Police Department that talks with them about, hey, if we're going to grow in this location, this is how many officers we need, new station, et cetera.
Yeah, we get, as part of our planning process, we get information from the city and the city departments on all of those infrastructure needs. So if we're looking at an update to the plan or a change to the comprehensive plan to allow for more development in a certain area, we send out that change to the various departments. They give us feedback. That's going to mean that we're going to need more a new fire station. We're going to need more police officers in this
School,
area.
whatever.
School,
Right.
yeah, the schools often, they're regularly giving us that kind of input. Transportation impacts, water, sewer, all forms of infrastructure. We're getting information on that. Some of that, there are processes later in the development review process to continue to ensure that that is in place. Others, we need to be addressing that up front at the plan amendment stage where we're looking for that early in that process.
And so you're a body that recommends to either Temple Terrace, I don't know how their government's set up. Is it a city council they have?
Yes.
Same thing with Tampa,
Mhm.
the Board of County Commissioners, where, hey, the Planning Commission has selected that this area receive a higher level of growth. You go back and forth with schools and the fire and these different people on the Planning Commission board and kind of set this structure up and then basically kind of present it to that governing body who adopts it. Is that this long and short of the process?
Yeah,
I know it's a little
essentially.
more complicated than
Yeah,
that.
I mean, it takes a while, and essentially, the first plan was adopted around 1989 for each of the jurisdictions, and so since then we have been updating those plans. We're in the process right now of updating the City of Tampa's plan, and so we're looking to extend out the horizon. We're typically looking out about 20 years to see what that future growth looks like. How do we need to change the plan to address new growth trends that we're seeing, changes in the community? How do we need to increase the land use in different areas? Yeah. And then we work with all the infrastructure agencies. Do we have things lined up in the right way to support that?
So one thing that I would like to understand is, like I said at the first part of the conversation, you look at these old pictures of Tampa and everything seems like it works very well. Like there's a great grid system. You've got a larger transportation network than we have today. I mean, streetcars that go all over the city and all this sort of stuff. And that was all done before a planning commission. Maybe they had some sort of version of it back then. I'm not exactly sure. Today, if you were to ask most people who are not in your industry, hey, has this area planned well for growth? They might say no, just because, geez, the sheer volume of people and the traffic and the roads and the cars. You've been in your role for 10 years, but you've been in planning your whole career. I'm sure you've traveled to other areas around the country. Do you think this area has planned well?
Yes and no.
Yeah.
I think there are some things that we've done well and some things that we have not. There are a lot of things so there was a time period where the Planning Commission was in place and the plans that were put in place didn't have a lot of teeth to them. They did not have any enforcement power. So prior to that 1989 plan that I talked about, that was the first real plan that under state law, things had to follow the plan. So in 1985, state law changed and local governments had to follow their comprehensive plan. Up until then, you local governments had a plan, but they didn't have to follow it. And so a lot of things happened that didn't meet the plans that were in place. So there are a lot of things, I'm not sure any planner would have put Fishhawk Ranch out where Fishhawk Ranch is that was approved in the mid 80s. In the mid 80s.
How does something like that happen? Is it because this is before that adoption by the state of Florida?
Yeah. So that occurred before there was a requirement that they had to follow a plan. So that things like that start happening, and entitlements get put in places where probably the planners, I mean, I wasn't here then, I assume they didn't, that wasn't part of the plan. So then the plans that came along in the late 80s, early 90s had to recognize those approvals. And so they kind of had to react to what was there.
Yeah.
And we couldn't take those away. Florida's a very strong property rights state. So taking rights away is not typically allowed. So then we have to kind of make the best of what we've got. So we've done a lot of good things in the city trying to reshape and encourage redevelopment in places like Channelside.
Yeah.
The plans, when we go back and look at plans from the late 80s and early 90s and what they called for in Channelside, they've come to fruition.
Yeah.
I mean, it's really cool to go back and see, hey, we called for that to happen, and now we have a neighborhood there, and it's more than what we called for happening. And but that transformation occurred, and that redevelopment happened, and that's very cool to see that came to be.
100%.
So some things we've done really well. That's a great example of that.
I think there's a lot that's been done really well.
South Howard Avenue is another good example of that. Like, now some people might complain that South Howard Avenue has a lot of traffic and a lot of parking problems and things like that, but it also has a lot of cool redevelopment. So,
oh yeah, and it's a very necessary area of the city. I mean, it just needs to be refined, and the progress needs to continue.
Right.
I think on this show we talk a lot about grievances and issues, but I will say I kind of had I wouldn't say a revelation, but I had a thought over the weekend driving down Bayshore and coming downtown. I was like, this city's come such a long way in my short lifetime. Like driving around in the 90s versus driving around now.
Yeah.
The amount of infrastructure work and good development and some of the architecture that's came to this city that I would have never thought possible.
Yeah.
And then you go downtown, I mean, the Riverwalk, and then Channelside.
Yeah.
I mean, to go from basically a district full of industrial uses to a near perfect example of a walkable urban neighborhood is kind of crazy, really, in like
it
20,
really
30
is.
years.
Yeah.
The complete shift.
Yeah.
And it's one of the best urban neighborhoods in the whole Gulf Coast of Florida. I mean, it's great. It's awesome. Need a little more green space. I know the city's working on that, but I don't. The philosophy around planning is always to look ahead, right? And you have what you have in front of you. And these things move very slowly. But planning is to what? Put the pieces in place so that 20 years later, you look back and you go, see, it worked.
Yeah.
It's not about today or tomorrow. It's about generations.
Right. Right. That's what I love about planning. I say it's kind of like a puzzle. You're trying to figure out how you can put the pieces in place to make something work. And you're always kind of having to shift the pieces around to see how you can make them fit a little bit better. And the pieces are always changing because the community's always changing. So you're always having to evolve the pieces and the puzzle.
Yeah, what people want changes. The way people live changes. I mean, look at Tampa's timeline, and not even Tampa, but just America in general, American cities, right? It all started off with these streetcar networks and these grid systems. I mean, this is before interstates even existed, before
Yeah.
the automobile was used as a main form of transportation. And then it's almost like there's an ebb and a flow, right? It went so far to the extreme in a car dependent culture where 30 years ago, had Water Street been developed, it would have been parking garages and,
Right.
you know, parking lot facing retail, much
Mhm.
like the old Channelside development,
Right.
right? In the early
Mhm.
2000s.
Yep.
And then today, people want walkable, safe streets, shaded streets, retail on ground floor, convenience, right?
Yeah.
Transportation,
Yeah.
smaller roads, larger sidewalks, all that sort of stuff. Like
Mhm.
you wouldn't really have a development like Water Street today had it been built 30 years ago. And I think the planning department would have probably not maybe foreseen the way people are living today with this pedestrian centric walkable culture that's growing. All age groups, all demographics are really enjoying it.
Yeah, I mean, our plans, I think were probably pretty progressive on that front. When I started at the Planning Commission in the early 2000s, we were talking about walkability. We had a livable roadways section of the comprehensive plan that talked about um, street trees and walkability. But it was at a very different scale than something like Water Street.
Hmm.
It resulted in things like the first iteration of something like a South Howard Avenue, Kennedy Boulevard, the overlay that developed for that. Things like West Park Village in West Chase. That was an early iteration of some of the work the planners at the Planning Commission did, working with developers to try to create something more mixed use in a suburban setting. So much more lower scale, but thinking about, yeah, we need to start to um, build an environment where there's a sense of place and
Hmm.
people can get from one use to another in with more choices and not necessarily always have to use the car, at least have
Yeah.
another alternative and have more things close to each other.
There's got to be a sort of baton handoff between, the city zoning department, then you guys at the planning
Yeah.
commission, right?
Yes.
Between you all and what you'd like to see and what you're planning for, and then the developer, the investor, the
Yeah.
private individual or company that comes in and actually builds the project. Talk to me about those roles. Like the planning department can only do so much, but it
Yes.
really is up to the developers to go in and kind of do the right thing for the community, or at least try to align themselves with their own vision
Yeah.
while operating within the box they're allowed to operate in.
Yeah. Very much so. So the comprehensive plan sets the long range policy, and we can put in things like we are in the plan update with incentives for folks to go even further than the policies outline and maybe do the right thing, go even further, do include affordable housing or develop more transit oriented options. Uh, then we hope that aligns with the land development code. Very excited about the update to the land development code that's happening that can dovetail right into the update of the comprehensive plan. Um, but then it really does take a developer to be our partner in that and really fulfilling that vision. And we've seen some of that happen. You just recently had, or maybe it just recently aired, the Midtown developer.
Right.
And
Nick
and
Haynes.
yeah,
Yeah.
and he talked about how he waited
Right.
years for that project to really come to fruition. And I think that's a great example of, he could have taken the easy out
Yeah.
and built a Costco or something, he said there, and in a very suburban model, but he waited and built something much greater there, that really is a much bigger contribution to the city, to the urban form, fulfilling much more of the
Yeah.
city's vision from the comprehensive plan there.
Well, I'm really glad you brought him up. It's a perfect example, right?
Yeah.
The numbers, the timing, everything would have told them, hey, build a Costco,
Yeah.
right? How do you incentivize developers to build something that's more cohesive with the community, right? Something like a Midtown. It's not I think Midtown has its place. I think at that intersection, that's the type of development that should go there,
Yeah.
right? But I would say that that development should not go in the urban core, right? Where it's more drive to.
Right.
Midtown is a drive to
Right. It
development,
is.
right?
Yeah.
But it's also time and place, right?
Right.
Maybe Dale Mabry and 275 is the right block to put something like that.
Yeah.
I was just there over the weekend at that Asian restaurant, Sunda.
Mm.
It's really
Mm-hmm.
great and it's lively and there's
Yeah.
people with their families enjoying it. But the exterior, right? Himes, what is
Right.
it? Cypress
Yeah.
or Columbus? I always get those two switched around. And then Dale Mabry,
Yeah.
Cypress.
Cypress. Yeah.
They're not that activated, right?
Right.
And so if
Right.
you were to build something like that in Water Street, I don't think it would
Yeah.
work as
You'd
well,
want to
right?
have more frontage on the. Yeah.
But those developers did that because they had a greater vision. And
Mm-hmm.
part of what you guys do, you have to leave up to the developer, right? So when
Mm-hmm.
you say incentives for affordable housing, incentives for a transit-oriented development, is part of pushing a developer over the edge to do a more significant, better project for the community. Is that how you do it, through those incentives?
Well, we try. And in this update, we worked with a consultant to try and calibrate some density and intensity incentives to hopefully give them entice them enough
Right.
to do those things, give them enough of a bonus to say, yeah, that's appealing, that they would want to take advantage of that. We don't know that we've gotten it right. We'll find out, and if we haven't, we'll keep at it and try something else. But yeah, that's the tool that we have in our toolbox.
Right.
There may be other tools that the city might look at within the land development code in terms of maybe reductions in parking or other things that they can look at that might be incentives, to and then it all puts it all together for the developer.
For sure. I think one thing that is going to help dramatically is some sort of transportation solution.
Oh, yeah.
And I know that's been talked about for decades, but maybe it didn't matter as much when Hillsborough County had 800, 900,000 people, right?
Yeah.
But now we're almost 1.5 million. I think our entire metro, look up Tampa Bay metro population. I think we're at 4 million if you include South Tampa Bay, meaning like Bradenton, Manatee County, stuff
yeah.
like that. I think we're at 4 million people, without a real robust transportation network.
Yeah.
And so I think there's going to be a lot of issues in the public where you continue to densify and you continue to build developments like Midtown around our region, but also at the same time not provide some of these public transportation options. The people are going to say, hey, no development is good development, which is not what we want. We want
Right.
people to really be thankful for a project like Midtown.
Yeah.
And when a project like Midtown is built and there's so many negative externalities that you can't even enjoy what it is, that's kind of a problem. So
Yeah.
to me,
for sure.
so how does transportation link with planning, right? And how can the planning department give incentive to municipalities or through the state provide the right structure where it's easy for municipalities to make some transportation projects happen? Because to me, it's the missing link moving forward,
Yeah. So within our agency, the Planning Commission staff provides staff to the Long Range Transportation Planning Organization, the TPO. So that's the federally mandated transportation planning organization that prioritizes state and federal dollars that comes to Tampa and Hillsborough County.
That organization, let me just pause you. What counties or municipalities are organized within that?
It is the same.
Same.
Tampa,
Hillsborough.
Hillsborough, Temple
Plant-
Terrace, and
right.
Plant City. And so our staff is intermixed with them. And we support that board as well. And so we have there's a link directly to land use and transportation. They go hand in hand.
More obvious than ever.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I mean, where there's growth, we're going to need transportation options. Uh, as a land use planner, I think land use should lead that conversation, as the transportation planners will tell you that transportation should lead the land use. But I think in that chicken and egg, land use should win. But
Well, what good is a bus stop or a streetcar
without the
stop?
people.
Right.
Yeah, right. So our plan is really to try to continue to incentivize and focus the growth in the city of Tampa along HART bus routes and where the streetcar is and where we're envisioning the streetcar to be extended. Because I'm eternally optimistic that Tampa will extend the streetcar, and that so that we can continue to support riders along those routes. Those routes can become more reliable, more frequent. We can have things like the HART BRT that they're looking at going up to the university area. One day, hopefully, out to the airport.
Yeah.
I mean,
Hell yeah.
we have studied transit from USF to downtown to the airport since I've started at the Planning Commission, and it is the route that to connect those three business districts is key.
Right.
Um, and it doesn't really matter the mode, whether it's bus, faster bus, BRT, light rail. We probably need all of those things at some point in our future.
100%.
We need it.
We need it. We need the ferry too.
Yeah,
You
we
know,
need all the options. We need bikes. We need
any
walking.
one
We need
solution
all of
is
these
not
things.
going to solve our issues here.
Exactly.
You know, we need a real comprehensive approach.
Yes.
So this is a sort of sister organization,
Yeah,
and it's called, remind me
the
again,
Transportation Planning Organization.
TPO.
TPO.
Okay, so
Yep.
this is a sister organization that exclusively focuses on transit.
Or
But
transportation.
transportation.
Yeah.
But your organization, you just said, focuses on transportation as well. Like you guys are having these conversations
Yeah.
too.
Yeah,
And
because the comprehensive plan has elements not just about land use, but also about transportation, about water, sewer, schools. The comprehensive plan is inherently comprehensive. It has elements of all of those things, and because we have to plan for all of it.
now, when you're looking out ahead 20 years, right? You know, you just mentioned that sort of putting some densification along. Hey, you know, Tampa's thinking about this route for the streetcar. Let's put densification along this route. Or here's the current heart map of bus stops. Like let's plan for some development intensification around those areas. But in 20 years, I hope we don't have the same footprint of transportation.
Oh, right. We worked with HART and are not just looking at just their current bus routes. We looked at
Right.
future bus routes. I mean, it's most of the arterials within Tampa. They would like to have bus routes on. We have a map of what we're calling transit supportive density areas within the city of Tampa, places where we would be able to, we believe, corridors that would be able to support transit in the future.
Transportation Planning Organization, is it within Plan Hillsborough?
Yes.
So Plan Hillsborough is the overarching entity.
Yeah, it's the name of the staff organization that supports the Planning Commission. The Planning Commission has an interlocal agreement to provide the staff to the Transportation Planning Organization. And then we also support a third board, the River Board, which is also established by state law. It works on the health of the Hillsborough River. And so it is members from the Temple Terrace, City of Tampa, and the unincorporated county.
Interesting.
So
Interesting.
we do all things long range and intergovernmental for that relate to land use, transportation, and the environment.
Now, I know you're not in the Transportation Planning Organization, but do they have some sort of a super long range golden ticket, transportation plan where they're saying, hey, if we had an unlimited budget, well, I shouldn't even say that. If we had 20 to 50 years, this is sort of what this should look like. Like, what are you going off of, I guess, is the question when you look at some of this stuff.
They do have a 2050 plan, and they do have what they call a needs plan, which outlines all the needs, including those that are unfunded. So there's no real funding source associated with them. Then they have to create a...
This episode is brought to you by the official remodeler of the TBD Podcast, Kohler House Remodeling Company. Built on the belief that every homeowner deserves a premium experience, Kohler House is redefining high-end home remodeling with their commitment to integrity, craftsmanship, and quality communication. Their work speaks for itself, from condos in the towers of Channelside to 100-year-old homes in South Tampa, creating spaces that are both stunning and functional. What sets Kohler House Remodeling Company apart is their dedication to not only transforming homes into beautiful spaces, but to elevating the standard of residential general contracting. From concept to completion, every detail is handled with care, ensuring a process that's as smooth as the results are impressive. To learn more, check out our partner's website at kohlerhouse.net, KOHLERHAUS.net. This episode is sponsored by Chansey Architecture and Interior Design. Rooted in the heart of Ybor City for over 35 years, Walt Chansey and his team are trailblazers in their field. Beyond their work across the United States and the Bahamas, Chansey has shaped some of the most iconic residential and commercial spaces that serve as gateways to Cigar City, including Casa Marti and Casa Gomez. What sets Chansey Design apart is their ability to preserve the soul and character of historic buildings while seamlessly integrating modern design and functionality. They blend tradition with innovation, creating spaces that honor the past while meeting today's needs. Check out their work at www.chanseydesign.com.
In the adopted long-range transportation plan, they just include those that there is a potential to fund. And it might be good to have Johnny on sometime. Johnny
Yeah, I
Wong.
just saw, go back, David, on the little ticker there. Johnny, he looks like a young dude. Is he
Johnny Wong is the...
is Johnny Wong? He must be a very forward-thinking...
He is.
Yeah, let's check out Johnny here. Look at this guy. Johnny Wong hosted a panel. You a lot. We'll have to invite him on the show. That'd be interesting.
He'd be
Now,
great.
that's not... I'm sure it's not just light rail bus system, right? They're
No,
looking at
it has
roads. I mean, everything. How people move around our region here, right?
Yeah, things like traffic signal improvements. They have a whole section on safety. They have a Vision Zero program trying to improve safety, goods movement, freight. They have a number of federally mandated programs that they have to address, congestion management, things like that.
Now, let's open up our aperture here and talk about this whole region, right?
Yeah.
There's been talks about joining or doing some sort of a collaborative organization, because right now we've only just talked about Hillsborough County, but our whole region interacts with each other, right? I mean, Pinellas and all these different counties.
Yeah.
Didn't there used to be a sort of organization that consolidated a few different transit and planning organizations?
So on the transportation side, there used to be an organization, TBARTA, the Tampa Bay Area Regional Transportation Authority, and that was dissolved by the legislature a few years ago. I don't know exactly how many. There are active talks about having a regional metropolitan planning organization. So the TPO is working with Pinellas and Pasco on talking about having a regional organization. They have a consultant who is working on facilitating those discussions about what that would look like, what a regional board composition would be, how that would operate. So that's ongoing. On the planning side, there is a Tampa Bay Regional Planning Council that facilitates discussions on regional issues. They do a lot of work on resiliency in our region, because that's a major issue for regional cooperation. They work a lot with some of the smaller local governments that don't have some of the capacity to do the planning, and they give them support.
Do you think it's necessary to merge the Planning Commission with Pinellas Planning Commission? I mean, it almost sounds like the transportation and resiliency, those conversations, certainly you'd want an organized regional, but do you need a regional organization for planning?
I think on the land use side, it would be very hard to
Yeah,
merge at a region, Hillsborough and Pinellas. I think those decisions really need to be understood at a local level.
right.
Hillsborough County already is very large. I mean, we're the size of the state of Rhode Island. To have those decisions removed further from the,
I was,
I feel like would be really challenging to be understood um, in the kind of way that our citizens want them to be understood. We get a lot of requests for neighborhood and community plans, and for folks to want for us to come out and do planning at a more granular level, which we do. We do in the unincorporated area. There are 23 community plans that have been done because the unincorporated area is so large, and we want to understand that Keystone is different from Ruskin, which is different from
right.
Brandon, and they have differences that need to be understood and articulated in their planning. And similarly, there are differences within the city of Tampa. Seminole Heights is different than Davis Island. And, we need to be able to understand those things and make sure that their land use plans are reflecting those.
Right.
So I think it would be really hard to understand the community well at a high if it was merged.
If it was merged on land use, but on
Yes.
something like
Yeah,
transportation,
transportation, the system has to work together.
right.
So I think the key is to make sure that the regional pieces are working really well together. At the same time, making sure that the local level needs, like the sidewalk gaps and the safety around schools, are getting addressed. So I think both sides of that coin need to be addressed. The TPO has been able to utilize some of the federal dollars that we get very effectively to do some studies to help augment the work the city or the unincorporated county or Plant City does to support issues like safety. And I would hate to see that taken away, but I think there's a way in a regional organization to make sure that some of those dollars
Yeah.
still get prioritized to some of those local needs.
Yeah, that's the biggest thing. That would be the biggest downside to me. For example, like the city of Tampa, when you look at the growth in the urban core, it is just absolutely unprecedented to have some of these projects coming online. I don't know that in the history of our city have we had more development within the
Yeah.
urban core. And
No.
that's going to come with a lot of connectivity and transportation challenges in the future. I reference it all the time, but this map we have over here, the Studio HB map, which has a
Yeah.
lot of the renderings of the projects to come,
Mm-hmm.
it's pretty striking to look at. I mean,
It
when you
is.
include Ybor Harbor and Gasworks and
Yeah.
Water Street's 30% complete if you take a look at the entire
It's
project.
crazy that that is
30%.
only
So
30%.
imagine, they have 2/3 or more of a way to go, plus the 80 acres Daryl Shaw has, right, in between downtown and Ybor. Then you've got the Armature Works Tampa Heights development, what Ellison is doing with the YMCA, the Center
Yeah.
City development.
Yeah.
You put all that together and you go, okay, we're going to for sure need some sort of a better transportation
Yeah.
network in the urban core.
Yeah.
My fear is that it gets drowned out if you have this overarching regional conversation and Tampa's like, well, we don't have what we want. And now if we're in talks and the guy next to me is from Pinellas, well, now we definitely aren't going to get what we need here. So I feel like there's got to be some sort of a balance of power, so to speak, and who says what and who gets what funding and priority. But I see what you're saying where it's like, local neighborhoods and local municipalities really are the ones that know what their own community needs.
Yeah.
So maybe from a land use and even certain aspects of transportation, that should be reserved for those people that are in their own particular community. And then establishing more of what some of those unincorporated areas need too, right? Like who's the voice for how many people live in unincorporated Hillsborough? Maybe, I mean, it's got to be close to 1 million
Yeah.
people don't live within a particular town or
Yeah.
city.
It is close to 1 million. Yeah.
So it's like who's kind of advocating and representing those folks too.
Right.
I think the higher, the more macro you go, some of those little issues get lost, and that's unfortunate.
Mm-hmm.
So if they do merge, I would hope to see some dedication towards some of those really like ground level things.
Mm-hmm.
We'll see, right?
Yeah. We'll see. The devil will be in the details of how it all works out. Yeah.
Well, I hope so too.
Yeah.
Talk to me about what the Planning Commission is working on now. You said they are working on a sort of new, I guess, kind of master plan, right?
Yeah, so we're working on the update of the City of Tampa's comprehensive plan. We have updated a number of the elements, like the mobility section and the sections. We did a section on One Water. Now we're bringing forward the land use element, which is probably the most controversial one. And we're really focusing on, as I said, identifying where the future growth should go in terms of our regional activity centers, downtown and Channelside, the West Shore area. It's a thick packet of reading.
How many pages is this, David? How many we got
Well,
here?
the over
345.
but the actual plan is
Sure.
much shorter than that.
We're going to do an 8-hour podcast today, Melissa. We're going to go through the whole thing.
I would never make anybody do that. The actual section of the plan is, I think, about 60 pages. So, which is much reduced from well over 100.
Now, real quick, why are we seeing some strikeouts?
Right. So what we're doing is we're deleting the existing version of the plan, and I think if you keep going, we'll get to the new draft eventually, and proposing new policy, because there was so much that was changed. It was just easier to delete all of the old and propose the new. So there you go. If you jump back a little bit, it'll start the new, about page 181 there. So we're trying to restructure and focus on really being clear about where we want growth. Because one of the things we heard from the community was the plan was not clear. Where do we want growth going forward? Let's focus that. We want it in our regional activity centers, West Shore, downtown, the Fowler area around USF. And then the next area where we want growth is in our transit corridors, along the fixed transit which is right now the streetcar, but it could be other corridors in the future should they get extended. And then the transit supportive density corridors are the other corridors that we've identified with HART, where there is either transit service or there would be transit service in the future. And then the other major place type that we have is what we're calling context-sensitive neighborhoods. These are neighborhoods that are feeling a lot of pressure from growth right now. They're in-town neighborhoods. They are having a lot of infill and redevelopment, but they have a historic context to them. And that pattern of development that needs to be retained. And what we heard a lot from the community was that people weren't adverse to growth. They didn't necessarily mind that sometimes it was going from one older unit to a new unit or one older unit to 2 units.
Right.
But what they didn't like was that it was going to 2 huge units, that the scale of the units was changing, and that the style of their neighborhood was dramatically, like changing so much. They wanted things to stay in context. And so we wanted to identify those neighborhoods where that was happening. Some of them are historic districts, some of them have some overlays in the land development code. But we thought by identifying these neighborhoods, we could unify that approach and provide some guidance to the work in the land development code update, to say with some urban design techniques, with some addressing some issues like parking and maybe how much of the lot they can build on, we could potentially handle some of the issues that we're hearing, and people might not be so upset about what they're seeing happen in their neighborhood.
Yeah.
They're not really anti-growth. They're just anti the impacts of the growth that's happening. So I think the issue, these context-sensitive neighborhoods are a real important piece to addressing some of what the upset that people are having.
Well, I think there's also a discrepancy between what you, right, and the zoning department and staff at any municipality writes in terms of a code or a plan, and the experience a neighbor or an individual, a visitor, a resident has while being in that neighborhood.
Yeah.
And there's only so much you can write down in a code, but you almost don't really know the way it will play out until the building is built and the community experiences it.
Right.
So do you look at other markets, right? Do you go to
Yes.
Dallas? Do you go to Houston? Do you go to Atlanta? These places that have experienced decades of growth, which we're kind of on the cusp of having ourselves. We know it's coming
Yeah.
to a certain extent. And so does the Planning Commission look around the country and around the world to see, hey, this municipality tried it this way, it didn't work, or it did work, here's the good and the bad? Like, is there how do you conduct research in determining all this stuff?
Yeah, we do. Interestingly, back in 2010, right when we were looking at the first referendum for transit, or one of the early referendums,
Version 37.
I know, right? The executive director at the time sent myself and another staff person to multiple cities across
Very
the
cool.
country to learn about transit-oriented development and how they had done it. I got to go to Denver and to Dallas to learn about that. He got to go to Salt Lake City, and
Cool.
I can't remember where else he went. But so yeah, we got to interview and meet with the staff and learn about what they had done. But we don't even have to go that far. Like St. Pete has some great examples of
Right.
what they are doing on this issue of context-sensitive neighborhoods. They have done some great work on missing middle housing and how to make it fit in some of their older neighborhoods. They've got grid pattern, older, housing stock that is converting over and wants having these same issues of infill and redevelopment. And they have like a guidebook of how to build it in a context that fits in with those neighborhoods.
Tampa
So
doesn't have that?
I don't think so. I don't think with the same predictability and
Sure.
with the same all the same options in all of the neighborhoods to the same degree that St. Pete does. And so I think they have a lot of tools in their land development code that they've put in just recent years that we could look to potentially to bring just across the bay.
Right.
And so we don't even have to look necessarily that far to see some examples.
So this is the City of Tampa Comprehensive Plan, Future Land Use section.
Yeah.
Now, when you said redo, essentially, I mean, you're kind of drafting this new piece of future land use for the City of Tampa. Is it just within the city boundaries, or again?
Yes.
Oh, so why wouldn't it be with the entire Tampa, Hillsborough, all of it at once?
So each local government has their own comprehensive plan. So we do 4 comprehensive plans. So we've already updated the unincorporated counties comprehensive plan. We completed that last year. Now we're working on the City of Tampa's.
Got it.
So
And so Describe the difference between the City of Tampa's land development code and then how it interacts with this future land use comprehensive plan.
Yeah, that's a great question. So the comprehensive plan is more broad. It's more of a policy document. So it will outline things like this is where you'll be allowed to do residential up to maybe 35 units per acre. And then the land development code will get much more specific. It will say that 35 units per acre has to be set back this far, 20 feet from the side yard. That's probably too far, but you get my drift.
Right.
Can only be 50 feet high. It sets very specific standards of how that can be built on property, what the parking standards are, all of the details of how that gets built on a piece of property are in the land development code. So we'll put certain big picture parameters in the comprehensive plan about how development can occur in different areas, what the broad policy should be on different topics, things like how development should occur in our coastal area or how affordable housing should be handled. But then the land development code will come in with more specifics to ensure that that occurs in the proper way.
Got it. David, I'm going to send you a picture here. Why can't I send this here? Can you come grab my phone, David? Try to figure this out. I don't know why it's not working. So the future land use section is a sort of guidebook, but the land development code within the City of Tampa is the rule book, the real code, the law.
Yeah. And so it's really important that the future land use section outlines the vision, where we're headed. And if the code and the rules aren't aligned with that, they're not headed in that same direction, then we're not going to get there. And so the land development code, right now, we're in the process of updating both. We're almost done with the future land use section, and it will go to City Council on May 22nd. And then the city is working on updating the land development code. That process will take a bit longer. It's a huge volume, so there's a lot of work in that. But this is the first time that they've been updated in sync with each other, to my knowledge. And that's really exciting because they both originally were last adopted. I mean, the land development code was last adopted in the 80s. Comp plan was originally adopted in the 80s. It's been updated multiple times since then. The vision has evolved in the comp plan towards something that's continued to be more walkable, more urban, more mixed use. I don't know that the land development code has evolved along with it. And so the land development code, if the rules are staying in this more 1980s,
Sure. We talked
suburban,
about that. People live differently now than they did in the 80s.
Yeah, then the rules are holding us from getting to that vision. So it's very exciting for a planning person like me to see them move together.
In tandem like that.
Yeah.
I mean, you just said that it basically has never been done before in that way.
Yeah.
Right? So now is the real amazing opportunity to get it right.
It really is.
And I think more, getting to that long range planning goal, right, is the goal. We've mentioned Channelside and some other areas where that's worked really well. But almost more importantly, it's to make it clear for everybody. I think a developer wants clarity just as much as a neighbor does,
Yes.
So the discrepancy between the land development code and the future land use, what's the best way to call it? Do you call it the comp plan? Right? That's the way to describe it, specifically the future land use section of the comp plan. the discrepancy between the LDC and the comp plan, right? It's like when those things go against each other, it helps no one,
Right.
except the attorneys who do all the PDs. Maybe that helps them. But you know what I mean, though? It's like you have to have a code that people can go into, whether it's your first time making an investment or a development or just someone buying a home in a neighborhood. Like it should really be clear for all people just to look at
Yes.
and go, okay, I know what I'm getting.
Yes.
You know, that
That
discrepancy can breed a lot of issues. I think
right.
that's kind of the reason we are where we are.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I think it's really important that our plan be very transparent. And I think everybody wants the rules to be very predictable and implementable of that
Hmm.
plan. And I think that's the goal of all of this. And I think that's why the city went ahead and
I see it
moved
happening.
forward with this
I
update
see it
and
happening in
this
a great
timing.
way. It's
Yeah.
like Clarion, that
Yeah.
company's very
They're
experienced in
great.
this, and the
Yeah.
city's paying them good money to come
Hmm.
in here and rewrite this whole
Yeah.
thing. And it looks, I'm very optimistic about the whole thing, really. I
Me
think
too.
it's going to be a complete game changer for this community to have a clear, concise code.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of the reasons why people are upset, I think those issues will be somewhat spoken for in this whole new rewrite. So you said the comp plan goes before city council.
On May 22nd, they'll have a hearing on transmitting this to the state. So, as part of the requirements in state law, any amendment to the comprehensive plan has to be reviewed by the State Department of Commerce. So, the city council hears it in a first hearing and they decide whether or not to send it up to that for that state review. So, that'll be on May
Oh,
22nd.
oh, geez. So the city council almost wants to make sure some of the loose ends are tied up so it gets through the state. Because what if the state poo-poos this whole thing, right?
I mean, they could.
Yeah,
Of late, the state has not made a lot of comments on many of
sure.
the amendments that we've sent up, but certainly they could, I guess.
Certainly they could.
Yeah,
And
typically
it's a,
the issues that the state comments on are um, what they call issues of state concern, things like major state uh, assets, like state lands or state owned properties like the interstate, like if there's a major impact to that, or something like impacts on the coast, things like that.
they're looking at larger issues,
Yeah,
right? State
yeah,
level type
yeah,
stuff, which makes sense.
right.
So is it a board of some sort that it goes before?
No, there's staff at the Department of Commerce that reviews it.
So it's not politically motivated. It's just simply there's state rules that they're trying to make sure that the comp plan fits within those rules, gets the stamp of approval, and then it comes back here for a full adoption.
Yes, City Council holds a first and second reading to
And
adopt it.
within that reading, the public has input,
Yes.
stake, all different
Public
types of
hearings. Yeah,
stakeholders. Right.
all of these are public hearings. The one in May, and then it probably will be July and August for those public hearings.
So
Maybe
within this
September.
comp plan for the city of
Hmm.
Tampa, you personally, I mean, you've been in planning a long time and you've been in your role for 10 years. What are you most excited about to see in the new comp plan?
Well, I'm really excited about the introduction of some new density bonuses. The city's never really had meaningful bonuses that have been incentives to developers above what the land use categories would allow. So we're trying these. We'll see, like I said earlier, whether or not we have them calibrated right, whether or not folks take advantage of them. But I think it's exciting to try something new
Yeah.
and see if it works and gets people to do. We've got an affordable housing bonus, a bonus for or for development on those transit ready corridors. We also have a bonus for green building.
Hmm.
So we'll see whether or not people take advantage of those. Um, I think we're clearing up a lot of areas where the plan has been kind of murky,
Hmm.
issues where it's not been very clear, like on issues about preservation of industrial land. We've identified some clear criteria about where we should be retaining industrial land and where we might be able to let some industrial land convert, because we've had a lot of debate about that. Similarly, we've identified very clearly areas within our coastal high hazard area where we believe, because there are community redevelopment areas, that we can allow for some increased density to occur. Um, and then that we need to hold the line on maintaining the densities that are currently allowed within the comprehensive plan, which still allows for growth in the coastal hazard area because things are not built out to the densities allowed in the comprehensive plan in the coastal hazard area. But that is our most vulnerable area.
Well, I
And
think the last thing anyone wants to do, maybe there's people that disagree, but I think you need to not go crazy, but certainly incentivize those coastal high hazard areas to build into the new building code. I mean, I don't want to see another hurricane ravage my community. I live south of Gandy and have
mhm.
all these homes from the 60s and 70s flood. These people oftentimes have lived there for a long time. They don't have a mortgage, they don't have flood insurance. They should be incentivized to build new, build up, or sell.
Mhm.
In order for them to go back, rebuild their home, and stay and get flooded out again is not really a good long-term safety strategy for a city that's, look, we're not getting rid of hurricanes, right? So
Mhm.
a lot of that community should at least be kept at the level it's at in terms of the densification in order for developers to come and build new homes. The new building code has provided awesome structures for these hurricanes. They've proven really well. They've proven to be resilient. And
Yeah.
so it seems like the more of those, the better. I'm not saying you put a 20-story apartment complex in an area where it doesn't make sense. I'm just saying you wouldn't want no new buildings to be built,
Right,
right?
right.
So it's
And nothing precludes them from having new buildings, or in many cases, particularly in South Tampa, the development that's there is below what the plan allows. So the plan might be at 10 or 20 units per acre, but the actual development that's there is maybe at 6 units per acre. So there's the ability
already,
for,
you're saying.
right, right. What's built is at 6 units per acre. They'd be allowed to build up to 10 units per acre. So they could redevelop and
Sure.
up to the 10. Nothing's stopping them from that. What we don't necessarily want them to do is come in and do a comprehensive plan amendment and ask to increase that from 10 to 20 or 35, because we don't necessarily need to put more people in an area where we don't have good evacuation routes, additional shelter space
Right.
in place to protect those people who are very vulnerable to those storms.
So it almost sounds like the existing incentive structure, if I could call it that, is adequate enough to incentivize developers to build new, right? Without completely going crazy and shoving a bunch of people on a peninsula that's, you know,
Yeah, we think so, particularly when there's not something in place in terms of infrastructure funding to support creating something to make that area more resilient or to address the infrastructure needs of that area. The reason that we've called out
the stormwater surcharge doesn't count as something that could go towards that funding.
I don't think that that is necessarily targeted enough to the coastal high hazard area to be
Sure.
able
It's a
to say that it's
citywide.
addressing
Yeah.
that issue. Um, what we were able to identify in the community redevelopment areas is that they have uh, the tax increment financing, and that is going towards infrastructure, directly addressing those areas as being um, more resilient and focusing. So that addresses areas like downtown and Channelside, the West River, and so those areas we are saying can be treated a little bit differently
Yeah.
um,
That
than
makes sense.
some of the other areas of the coastal high hazard area.
That makes sense because South Tampa is a very high demand place. It's where a lot of people want to live. And because you already have that built in demand, you don't
Right.
need to go crazy with the incentive densities for developers because it's a lot of the neighborhoods in there are A+ neighborhoods from the spec developer perspective.
Right.
And so when the opportunity comes up to purchase some of these older homes that were built below the floodplain, they'll get naturally picked up and redeveloped over the course of the next few decades. So
Mm-hmm.
I think given enough time, this sort of problem can solve itself.
Mm-hmm.
But to accelerate that time scale and build in densification in areas in these coastal high hazard areas, that would seem like a not so smart idea, but it sounds like you guys have recognized that and excluded some of that densification, right? Because you mentioned like there's certain areas where you do want more
Yeah.
density,
Yeah.
just
Those.
not in an area that
Right.
that can be supported by special, essentially tax
Right.
districts.
Right. Those that have that additional that special taxing through the tax increment financing. And I should say this is staff's recommendation. This has to go through the planning commission still and ultimately Tampa City Council, and
Yeah.
they'll make a final decision on what all these policies say.
What's the controversy behind this, right? What's the reason why there's probably this part of it, the coastal high hazard area, is the most controversial, right? It's where the most, members of the public get the most vocal.
Yeah.
Um, Now, good reason for it is that, hey, we don't want to shove a bunch of people on a peninsula. There's evacuation issues, et cetera, right?
Yeah.
But it sounds like what you're proposing is very reasonable, right? It's like, hey, there's already entitlements in these areas that are above and beyond the current development. So a developer could buy a particular piece of property and get more than there is now, right? It's also
Yeah.
a high demand area. You're going to have those built-in demand incentives. Where's the controversy?
Well,
To take it further than that?
yeah, some within the development community would like to be able to ask for more. Our original draft called for not allowing for them to be able to ask for comprehensive plan amendments. Based on feedback from the Planning Commission at their last hearing, the Planning Commission would like them to be at least allowed to ask. It may still be very strong language saying that that's not a good idea,
And
but
ask meaning go before city
go before
council.
city council. Come make an application and go before the Planning Commission and city council. Um, Even if ultimately the policy says you should not,
But the right to
but
ask,
yeah, the right
right?
to ask.
Essentially.
The policy had said you wouldn't even be able to make an application, and that was something that in working with city legal, they felt was something we could include in the plan. But the planning commission felt that was taking a bit too far, so we're working to revise that. It'll still, I think, be something very strong about how those are not the right locations to increase density. But people will have the ability to ask for that plan amendment and go through the process. Um, I think there are some who still would like it to be more permissive than that. And then there are some on the neighborhood side who really liked the prohibiting the plan amendment because they don't want to have to go through those hearings and those fights every time. So
I don't know. Part of me thinks some of them like it.
you,
I'm
you
just
never
kidding.
know. Um, the and and then I think there are certain areas where once we started to identify certain areas, the community redevelopment areas is cut out. Then we've heard from areas like the Ybor Harbor area, for example. That's not all within a community redevelopment area. And so we've heard from some of those representatives saying, well, what about this area that's just outside of the Ybor CRA? Um, and well, we had a methodology we were following, well, you don't meet that methodology, you know. So there are some folks who are, well, now what about me? What about this area?
Well,
What
it's a
about
good
that area?
question, right?
It is.
I
They're
mean,
all fair
that's
questions.
also
It's
the
just
industrial area
right,
conversion to a more mixed use area too.
right, right.
That site,
Yeah,
Ybor Harbor, really encompasses a lot of this
it does have a
conversation.
lot of, yes, a lot of the issues
It
all
sounds
in
like
one.
the solution, I mean, it's more complicated, but the short answer, what, is to include that within the CRA, right? And then you've got
That could be
the
one. Yes,
support
that
for
could
the
be one.
infrastructure to be able to develop
Yes,
that, right? But otherwise, the answer would be no, right? Because you're within the coastal high hazard
right.
and you're not within a
Right.
CRA.
Now, they have done some of their plan amendments already. So some of it has been already changed to mixed use. And they may have another one in process right now ahead of this policy change. And then if they're allowed to ask for the amendment, even though the policy may not be supportive, they would have the ability to ask and make their case to city council. But I think a number of their properties are already in process in advance of this policy.
It won preliminary approval of some sort at Tampa City Council a couple years
Yeah,
ago.
yeah. I think most of this where the uh like just south of the crosstown is already been changed. So
That's a long road though. That'll be
yeah,
who knows how long
yeah.
until they so David, go to like Rattlesnake Point area. I think
Mm.
the area that people point to in South Tampa, myself included, that are fearful of, right? When it comes to this, oh, increase entitlements for developers. Yeah, David, there you go. Where are you on the map? What is this? Toronto? What'd you type in? Rattlesnake Point. You know where it's at? South Tampa, Gandy Bridge, all the way west, right north of the airbase, southernmost
There you
bridge.
go.
So in this area, they have, I guess I'll use the word shoved, hundreds and hundreds of
Yeah.
single use apartment units. Now, you do have a little commercial over here on the west side of West Shore, not quite enough.
Mhm.
I live on the other side, on the Bayshore side.
Mhm.
Boy, I'd hate for them to build thousands of apartment units in my neighborhood. You
Yeah.
know, no wonder why these people are pissed off. I think that's the big fear, is a distasteful amount of growth. When you put that many hundreds of units that is car dependent in a particular area with one road,
Yeah.
and then leading up to West Shore and Gandy, I don't know how in any way that should be allowed from now and on. So I think that particular type of development is the fear. But however, at the same time, David, go to like Manhattan Avenue, which is this next street here. Go north. So West Shore, Manhattan. Go north a little bit. Put the little man on Euclid in Manhattan. And if you're just listening, no, that's West Shore. Yeah, Manhattan. If you're just listening, I'm just trying to show the commercial. Now, this is probably a bad example. Tanner Paint's done a good job at making that look nice. There's a lot of corridors in the city of
Mhm.
Tampa that really do need heavy incentive
Mm.
to be redeveloped.
Mhm.
I will not say the name of the shop, but I was in a shop, a nice place, you know, with my wife, trying to
Mhm.
look for some consignment furniture, a little new wardrobe for our baby coming up here in the next month or so. And it was pretty atrocious. I mean, it was like
Mm.
a really nasty old building. And
Yeah.
I stood out in this area and was looking around, and I was thinking, these commercial corridors in Tampa are so behind some of these residential projects that have been approved in the last few years. I mean, you look at Water Street and the Ritz-Carlton, some of the condominium projects and some of the stuff around the city on the residential and mixed use side, it's really exciting. Boy, these commercial corridors are really lacking.
Yeah.
And my fear, this is just like personally, I mean, I live in South Tampa, but I would hate to put too many prohibitions on incentive structures for developers. And then 20 years later, we still have these commercial corridors that are lacking. I'm sure there's a balance there, right? Between those single use apartments shoved into a particular area that I described. And then, hey, we do need to provide incentives so that developers can come in and revitalize the commercial corridors along with the rest of the city. It sounds to me like the way the Planning Commission was going to incentivize that was through the transit oriented development, right? These transit oriented, what do you call them? The corridors, transit corridors.
Yeah.
That would be what, like Manhattan, Dale Mabry, McDill,
Yes.
Kennedy.
Yeah. And they would, so yes, they would get incentives for additional either density or intensity. So they would get additional square footage for non-residential development as well. There also are some additional incentives to create more neighborhood commercial areas. So within some of our land use categories, we have loosened a little bit the rules about where neighborhood commercial can occur so that it can occur at more intersections, because we
Love it.
heard people really like being able to walk to the corner store,
Bring back the corner store.
yeah, the dry cleaners, all of that. We want to continue to foster that within our neighborhoods. So, making that more accessible within the neighborhoods to occur, we've added some criteria to allow that to happen in more places. And then we also have some criteria to have more vertical mixed use, so more ground floor retail in a residential structure. So apparently, we've heard from many developers, we're kind of unique that we allow people to use their floor area ratio, which is the square footage of their structure, for residential. And one of the ways that they're incentivized to do that is if they do have a part of the ground floor as another use, then they can use the top floors for residential, but they can, instead of counting it by residential units, they can just count it by the square footage of the building. And that gives them a big incentive because they can cut up the square footage differently than if they have to count it by 20 dwelling units per acre. They can just do it based on their square footage and put as many dwelling units in there as they want. And that often yields them more units.
Yeah.
And so we've been working on a requirement for an amount of ground floor retail that or second use that has to be in
By
that.
square footage.
Yeah, we're playing with what that percentage of the ground floor has to be. We'd started at 60% of the ground floor, and we've heard that that's a little bit high. So we actually have some meetings with some in the development community tomorrow to get some more feedback on what's maybe a little bit more realistic percentage.
Interesting. What are there particular intersections the Planning Commission looks at to create these sort of neighborhood villages almost?
We're focused on the intersections of like arterial and collectors. So it's really mostly based on the functional classification of the roads.
Got it.
Yeah.
Got it. Now, some of these collectors are within the coastal high hazard.
Yeah, and for non-residential uses, for the location of the commercial, that's okay.
Right.
But they wouldn't necessarily be eligible for, none of the density incentives would be applicable in the coastal high hazard area. So the bonuses and things like that would not apply in the coastal high hazard area.
Even if you're hitting those bonus marks in the coastal high hazard and you want a residential component. So the residential component is what triggers that rule with the coastal high hazard.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah, I think the best way you can alleviate either some of the mistakes or even look the future, there's going to be bad development built in the future. Let's just hope there's less of it, right? And it's not to say that development's been bad in Tampa. I just think that this is kind of what happens when you don't have a clear vision for the future, right?
Yeah.
And when you have sort of a mixed match thing where you're looking at a site, oh, it's this zoning. Well, let's see what this city says the zoning is. Oh, refer to this future land use. Oh, well, that kind of conflicts there.
doesn't
It
really
can get a
match.
little bit muddy, you
Yeah.
know? So I think that the clarification of it alone
It's
is a
gonna
massive help, right?
Yes.
And
so
then, David,
much.
go back to Rattlesnake Point. Like, to me, the way you can alleviate some of that pressure is to allow for some commercial uses, like at the corner of West Shore. Ooh, it's so tricky right there in Tyson. You really don't have space for it at all. But when you have how many apartments are on that little peninsula right there? Let's just say, God, it's got to be quite a bit, over 1,000. But let's just say it is 1,000. When 1,000 people need to hop in a car to go get any errand completed, whether it's a service or buying a good, that creates traffic, that creates issues. And I think a more mix of use within right,
Yeah.
a community can
Yeah,
actually solve for some of this stuff.
and my staff would want me to make sure I was on the record saying that the Planning Commission did not recommend the changes to the land use map on Rattlesnake Point.
So was that a City of Tampa thing?
The city council approved those above the Planning Commission's objection or finding it inconsistent with the comprehensive plan. So, city council doesn't always agree with us, and the Planning Commission doesn't always agree with staff. That's part of the process. That's why all of these steps are in place, and that's why I think that's kind of the beauty of it. And if it was all a rubber stamp, why would you need any of it? But these steps are in place so that each gets its own look at it. Staff gets a look at it. The Planning Commission holds a hearing and gets a look at it, and then they provide their objective view as citizen volunteers in the process. And then City Council gets to look at all of that plus more because they have a hearing. And they look at it from a different vantage point, and they came to a different conclusion, and they approved it.
Different times too, let's say.
Very different times.
Maybe when all those entitlements were given, hey, Tampa needs the growth. We need the units. We need the tax base.
Right.
How do you fix this? How do you pay for the fire and the police and the roads? I mean, you need that from an increased tax base.
Yeah.
So maybe at the time it was a little more favorable to do so.
Right.
Short-sighted, sure, maybe. I don't know.
Yeah.
But it seems like now and in the future, this council and everything you've talked about today, there's a little bit more barriers, probably the wrong word, but certainly a higher standard for development. Like if as an example today, if someone had suggested this, the political climate, the neighborhood involvement, what this city council has been outspoken about with their vision, including the administration, I don't think that would have been approved today.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of awareness, particularly right now, given that we had 2 hurricanes last season, to the coastal issues, the evacuation issues. I think city council's very aware of the long-term impacts of something like this and the need for infrastructure and how much of a deficit we have in that regard as a community as a whole. We've got a lot of needs and not a lot of resources to keep up with those needs.
One thing you've said a couple times is how basically we can't take away entitlements. We can only sort of give entitlements.
Yeah.
With Hillsborough County having 1,000,001 people, no, 1.4 million, right? 1,400,000 or more, probably 1.5 million, right? Close to. You drive out east, the amount of neighborhoods and roads and traffic, it totally blows my mind. I grew up driving from Tampa to Sarasota, so I've watched that corridor grow and develop my whole life. And what used to be a separation of urban areas has now become kind of one big urban area. And Fishhawk and Parrish and Lakewood Ranch and these communities that are in unincorporated areas have completely overtaken pasture land and rural areas. And to me, that puts so much more burden on local government, the schools, the need for fire department, the need for police, the road maintenance. Like these suburban areas are so, I don't want to say subsidized, but they just require a lot. They require a huge tax base to sustain. But there's also at the same time this culture of walkability we've talked about. And some of those car dependent areas, I mean, what happens if we were to build all these suburban areas and 30 years later, I don't know, more people want to live in an urban environment than they do suburban. And now these municipalities have to deal with this road network, right? And these gated communities and all this sort of stuff to pay for. Is the how big is the cultural component, the way people want to live today versus as they did in the 80s? How big of that conversation is had when you go to look out decades in the future? Do you plan to say, hey, there's a trend towards urbanism?
Yeah, we do. We look countywide at the projected population, and then we part of what we do is look at how much of that population will go into each area. So, how much of that do we think will go into the city of Tampa, largely wanting sort of that urban choice?
Right.
And one of the things that I think is the coolest about Hillsborough County is that we have three choices. You can live in an urban choice, you can live in a suburban area, you can still live in a rural area in Hillsborough County. And that's pretty unusual to be able to do that and do that in such close proximity to a city like Tampa.
But are there areas off limits though? I mean, if you can't take away entitlement, you can only give it at a certain point decades down the road. Is this whole
Well,
county just urban?
that is not the vision that the unincorporated counties comprehensive plan has right now. They have an urban service area that has maintained some areas as rural because they are kind of identifying these are the areas that are going to be growing to be urban or suburban.
Right.
And they are looking at expanding that area, but that still says these areas outside of that boundary are going to stay rural. Areas like Keystone, areas of Lutz, areas
Right.
of
That kind of
um,
Odessa, like,
yes, certain parts of Thanona Sassa, maybe some parts, Keysville out south of Plant City. So there definitely are areas where they are saying, no, because the county realistically, the other part of that urban service area is that it plans out where they're going to be able to serve with services. It's not realistic that the county is going to be able to serve everything. So they need to have a plan for
mhm.
where the growth can go and where the services can go. And that is a tool for planning that. And so we're looking at expanding in a couple of spots, but that means that those other areas would stay rural. And I think that's every survey that we've ever done. That has been probably the highest rated thing that we've heard from unincorporated county residents is they want to still be able to have choices and the choice to have a rural option in
Yeah.
Hillsborough County.
Yeah. I mean, this is just me personally, but I drive out there sometimes and I'm like, geez, when is enough enough? Is it sustainable? When you go down 75 between Tampa and Sarasota, just the amount of traffic,
Yeah.
you can't imagine it growing more than it is today, but it is and it will,
Yeah.
And how does that affect our region? I mean, we talked earlier about transportation. It's like, how do you move these hundreds of thousands of people
Yeah.
from A to B? Um, losing something as small as the ferry, right? And I understand that that was probably that operator's screw up. I think they basically breached their contract. Long story short, there, but
Mm.
it just sucks to see as a resident. You're like, oh, well, there's one little other transportation thing
Yeah.
gone. But then at the same time, the county just approved, what was it out east, like 3,000 new homes, something like that. Can you try to pull up that article, David?
Oh, the
And I'm just
in
thinking, like,
Waimama or
yes, yeah, yeah, yeah.
um,
So I look at that and I'm like, damn, wow, 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 wow. Florida now has what, 23, 24 million people.
yeah, yeah. I mean
Something's got to be preserved.
the yes, and I think that um, it's a balance, and uh, like I said earlier, kind of a puzzle trying to put together. I think Tampa and the redevelopment and the urban piece is a really important part of that puzzle. Um, but there's still a demand for
Oh yeah.
the suburban choice within our community. And if we don't make that option available, everybody's going to have to drive to Manatee County or to Polk or to Pasco. And I don't know that that's the right answer either. So, what I would like to see, and this is Melissa talking as Melissa, not represent necessarily the opinion of the Planning Commission, um,
This is
is
going to be
it,
hard to do. Okay. Okay.
is to see some of that development more clustered in some of the areas where we expand the urban service area. So it's not just, we're looking at the I-4 corridor. Is that, more, is it all single family homes, or do we create some town centers? Do we create another West Park Village, some places
Yeah.
within that corridor that,
Yes.
starts to give a sense of place within those communities? I live in Brandon, and a lot of times there's not a there for us to gather. Um,
Well,
you
so
know,
you mentioned early on in your career, you commuted from Brandon when you worked at the City of St. Pete.
yeah,
Have you been in Brandon for, I guess,
yeah,
20 years?
yeah, I
Oh
have.
my gosh. So I'm
Yeah,
talking to a person who absolutely knows what I'm talking about,
yeah,
right?
yeah,
That transition from Brandon
yeah,
being this extremely convenient, still kind of is actually, if you take
yeah,
the Selman,
yeah,
right? Suburb of Tampa to now, oh my gosh, the amount of homes and people and roads,
yeah,
and it's a striking
yeah.
level of growth. I see what you're saying though, where it's like, hey, maybe I don't need to drive for a half hour to go to the movies or a grocery store, or
Right.
go fit my needs of whatever good and service I'm looking for, like something in my own community.
Yeah.
And so that, right, that idea in your role at the Planning Commission is to allow developers to get that sort of density within particular urban
Yeah.
villages, so to
Yeah.
speak, right, of these suburban
Exactly.
areas. So
Right.
not everyone's on the road trying to go all the way across
Right.
the county for whatever they need.
Right. If we can alleviate some of the traffic by doing that, if we can create, a place where people want to be, and meet some of their daily needs within their community. I mean, we've started to have in parts of Brandon. There's an area called Winthrop.
Yeah, yeah.
There.
Kind of cool.
Yeah, it is. And, um, you can walk around and get ice cream and do shopping, and it meets the needs of a lot of things within one small area. If we could replicate that in some other areas where we're developing, that would help alleviate some of the problem. If we could also at the same time maybe have a jobs component, because we're along I-4, and that's an asset that we should take advantage of, because maybe an employer would want to locate along that. Like, wow, that would be great. I don't
Yeah.
know that we're going to have all the pieces of the puzzle come together, but I'd like to try.
Well, I
Um,
don't know that I've ever been anywhere on this planet where I'm like, okay, everything here is perfect, right?
right,
Like,
right,
I
right.
don't know that that's, um, but it's, I think that there's certainly a way where you can manage things
Yeah,
efficiently,
yeah,
moving forward. So it's good to know that all this is being done at the same time. I think we could have this conversation in 10 years and be like, look, see what happened, right?
yeah.
Like this
And
is a
some
good
of
thing
it will have, and some of it won't have. And we'll be working on adjusting the puzzle to see
all
what.
along the way.
Yeah, exactly.
What was the one thing? Hold on real quick. What was I going to ask you? Dang it, I forgot. It slipped my mind. How long we been rolling, David? Hour 45? Wow. Well, thank you, Melissa, for being here. I really
Yeah,
appreciate it. Let's talk real quick, lastly, and then I'll let you run here
yeah.
about kind of these next steps.
Hmm.
Okay. So it sounds like some of the future hinges on the state, but that's more of a staff stamp when they're looking at this thing. But then a
Yeah,
lot of it is going to be up to Tampa City Council to
yeah,
look through and to hear the public and to probably make some adjustments, I
yeah.
would assume,
Yes,
and then eventually adopt.
yes,
Um, your role is to draft all this up and present it, essentially,
yes.
correct?
Yes, we present a staff recommendation to the Planning Commission. They will hold a hearing. That's on May 12th, and then they will make a recommendation to Tampa City Council. They'll hold that hearing on May 22nd. Again, get input from the public, like you said, probably make some adjustments, and then send it to the state. And I should mention, it's not just the Department of Commerce that reviews it, like DOT and the Department of Environmental Protection, other state
Emergency
agencies.
management, I'm sure.
Yeah, probably.
Yeah.
We rarely get comments from them, but maybe they review it.
Well, I
Uh,
guess that's a good thing, right? That means you're on the right track. You don't
yeah,
get comments, right?
yeah,
Maybe.
hopefully. um, so a number of state agencies take a look at it, and then council will come back, hold another public hearing
So
to
call the
adopt.
time frame 18 months or so till it's adopted,
Yeah, it
hopefully.
should be adopted by September.
It should be adopted by September. So
Hmm.
before Tampa's land development code is adopted, the new rewrite,
Hmm.
which is an opportunity for the city to take the adopted comp plan
Yeah.
and go, okay, how do we better align with this new comp plan?
Yeah. And we've already been working with the city on the LDC. We looked at the assessment that came out, and it already looks like it's very complementary. Already starting to align a lot of stuff with what's in the plan draft. So that's very exciting to
Yeah,
see.
that's
Yeah.
amazing.
Yeah.
Well, I'm confident. Everything I've looked at looks pretty dang good, and I'm excited to have some clarity and consistency so that the developers have an easier time at knowing what they're getting into. I think some of the ambiguous nature of this inhibits small developers like myself, just small and medium-sized people that are doing like one-off projects. Like
Yeah.
we need good intentional people who are a part of this community to do good projects.
Absolutely.
And when you have a code that's maybe ambiguous or not quite clear or hasn't been updated in 40 years, right? Then you actually are keeping out some of those people that are not building Water Street, right?
Yeah.
To come in and do good things.
Yeah.
And then at the same time, you can also provide good clarity to neighbors, people that have lived here for
sure.
30 years that are seeing a lot of change, right?
Yeah.
And then they have a new clear code where they can like, okay, I know what I'm looking at the next
Yeah.
decade or 2 decades of my life.
Yeah.
You know, it's like across the board, clarity, consistency is a good thing. And I think you guys are on the right track with it.
Yeah.
So
I
it's
hope
looking
so.
good.
Yeah.
All
I'm
right,
excited.
cool. Well, listen, thanks for coming on today and
Yeah,
spending
thank
time
you
with
so
me.
much.
This was a lot of fun.
Yeah, it was a lot of fun.
If people want to be a part of this, right, and kind of follow along,
Yeah.
how can they do that? What's the best way to receive some public engagement
Yeah.
updates from you guys?
Our website, planhillsborough.org, there's a way to get involved. There's a tab for that, and they can sign up for our email list. There's right in the middle, you can click on the City of Tampa land use update and see the project page, see all the drafts. But up there at the top right, it says be involved. You can also follow all our socials, all that sort of good stuff. We have surveys regularly on different topics. We love to get input from folks.
So public meetings, special events, invite us to speak to your organization. So you guys will actually
Yeah.
come in and give talks about all this sort of stuff. You guys have a monthly
Absolutely.
newsletter people can subscribe to.
Yeah.
High school students can get involved. And then a TPO advisory committee. There's different committees on different things.
Yeah, particularly for the transportation planning organization, they have a number of committees that are required. Like there's a bicycle pedestrian committee, a
Cool.
livable roadways committee, citizens advisory committee. So there are opportunities for folks to get involved on the transportation side in particular. Yeah, we just closed applications for our Future Leaders in Planning program, but this time next year, if there are any high school students who are interested in planning, we would love for them to get involved in our free week-long program where they can learn about planning for their community.
Very,
Yeah.
very cool that you invite young people to be involved in this sort of stuff.
Yeah.
Was fascinating to me as a kid to kind of look around and wonder, how does all this come together? And then David, lastly, click Plan Hillsborough Instagram so people can follow along. I'm always seeing you guys posting certain little updates and stuff like that. So it's on Instagram. It's just at Plan Hillsborough.
Yep.
Very cool. Melissa, thanks again.
Yeah.
I
thank
appreciate your
you.
time. All right.
Yeah.
Bye, everybody.